Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today I have a pretty cool knife. This one has gotten a lot of attention this year, and I think deservedly so. I want to share my thoughts about it with you. And I've got to say, by way of introduction, I think if you just look at the knife like this, we'll flip it over and check out this side as well. I've got to say the design itself, the milling in the titanium, the overall just shape when it's closed and even when it's open. This of course is a zero tolerance 0055, and this is a very compelling knife design. It is of course based on the GTC Airborne, which is a custom knife, and GTC knives are not only very expensive, but they're very hard to get. Like, there just aren't a lot of them out there. When they do come along, yeah, you're really going to pay for them. And so to have a production collaboration with GTC and Zero Tolerance, and really Kershaw, I know he's done a few other, a bunch of Kershaw knives as well, is a pretty cool thing. And not the least of which, or really the primary reason it's so cool is because his knives are so interesting and so in demand that a lot of people are going to be drawn to them and just not have the opportunity to get one. And so, now there's at least the chance to buy something that is well put together, okay, that is faithful to GTC's designs, and is relatively functional. Although, let me say this, I think the primary, the primary reason people are buying these is because of the design. Okay, they're buying it because it's a cool design, whether it's because they know about GTC and are buying it because they know they'll never get one, and that's sort of the boat I fit into, or whether they look at it and go, yeah, I've not seen too many knives like that. Okay, really, really different and really, really well done. Okay, now that's from a design standpoint. That's from sort of a collector standpoint. And so I think we need to appreciate that. It's really, really important that we get what this knife is offering, okay? So now let's start talking about some of the features and some of the specifics here. And at some points we'll find that design, although it's an amazing looking knife, it really is, there are a couple things I would have liked to see done differently. There are a couple of features that you're not going to find anywhere else, which is really, really awesome. Okay, and we'll just kind of get this sort of back and forth with this knife as we work our way through. So let's start with size and weight, and I think size and weight is definitely a win for this knife. 8 3/4 inches overall, so it's a fairly large knife. 3 3/4 inches on the blade length. Okay, 5 inches on the handle, and this knife weighs in at a fairly comfortable 4.9 ounces. It's about ½ an inch thick. It carries pretty slim, and if you look in here, I know you can see the backspacer there, and that bright blue is hard not to pay attention to, but the knife has been milled out internally to save weight, and that's really, really nice to see. Zero Tolerance does not always do that. I remember, and with some of their models, they started doing it and then kind of dropped it partway through the production, like the 0560 and possibly even the 0300. Anyway, it is nice to see the internal milling to cut down on a little bit of the weight on this knife. Gotta say, that's a really, really nice feature, and 4.9 ounces makes it pretty comfortable to carry, at least for me. I know there are probably some of you who don't want anything over 4 ounces, but for a knife of this size, it's pretty hard to find any, knives under 5 ounces, I think is very, very reasonable for a knife of this size. So let's go ahead now and talk about the blade. The heart and soul of any knife, okay, is going to be that blade, and this is a pretty cool one. It's sort of a modified Wharncliffe design. You've got this double bevel here, so a compound grind, or yeah, with 2 different bevels, and the transition is done pretty well. All right, now here's my biggest complaint about this. Well, let me finish the specs first. So it's S35VN with a stonewash finish, modified Wharncliffe blade shape, and a compound grind. So really, really interesting, really cool looking grind on this knife. But here's my biggest issue with it. By stonewashing the knife, you hide some of that intricacy, right? One of the things that I love about compound grinds, and if I wish I had my my Microtech DOC here so I could show it to you, but on the DOC, it's the grind lines that make that compound grind look so awesome. And maybe go pick up a picture of a DOC in satin and see what I mean. But this knife is all stonewashed, and so here's what, from a visual standpoint, I go, okay, you're going to do this really cool grind that is going to look really nice, but then you're going to hide it by putting a stonewash on the blade. And that's one of the things from a design standpoint I really don't get. Maybe they felt like they wanted a closer match between the blade and the handle, but you know, I think a satin blade is very natural and normal on a knife, and is expected as part of the design. Anyway, so I don't think that would have detracted from the overall look. In fact, I think it would have been really, really nice. And my biggest complaint about this blade is not the utility, okay? It's actually the fact that it's stonewashed, not a satin grind. Now, in terms of utility, in terms of when you go out to use this knife, what's going to happen? Well, it's not a horrible knife. And for utility tasks, you know, if you're opening packages, if you're cutting cardboard, it does those things just fine. Cutting up an apple, it's going to struggle a little bit. One, especially here at the base, it's a fairly thick, or it's a fairly abrupt angle. It's a little nicer out here at the tip. And so you can kind of use the tip and get some work done, but it's a little awkward ergonomically to work with just that portion. You know, imagine trying to hold something in your hand and now you're going to just cut like that. Most of us naturally grab something here and get to work right at the base of the blade. And that's fairly standard procedure, and that's fairly instinctual, I meant to say. So although the blade, I love the potential of it, I don't think it's quite realized. Certainly I will say this, as a utility blade that's primarily for EDC type of tasks, as long as you don't try to do too much woodworking or food prep, this blade is going to be really, really good. So I can't say too much bad about it. And of course, it's S35VN, so it's going to hold an edge really well, highly corrosive resistant, like a great steel. Okay, so that's my take on the blade. I'm a little disappointed in the look of it. Otherwise though, as a utility blade, it's great, okay? Now, let's move on to lockup and deployment. This is where we want to spend a little more time because there's some cool stuff going on here. Most importantly is the SLT, that is the spring-loaded tab. So this is a flipper tab that kind of is spring-loaded, so it folds up, and then when the knife is deployed, it is totally gone. I'll see if I can... You can see it, but I don't think I can, yeah, I can get it to come out. So there's the tab there, and in a normal knife, that's where that tab would land. Okay, now there's a sense in which I kind of wish they'd left this sticking out here. We'll talk about that when we get to ergonomics. But for now, there's that spring-loaded tab, and it works to make the tab very unobtrusive, which does make this knife really nice in pocket. It slides into your pocket very easily. The tab, from a design standpoint, you don't have this weird thing sticking out at the back like you do on a lot of knives. And it does work extremely well in terms of actually deploying the knife. So all of that is really, really cool. And I've got to say the spring-loaded tab, I think, is a great feature on this knife. And I hope to see it on some other ZTs in the future because it is a really, really impressive feature. Hopefully, and I'm, you know, I have nothing against GTC Knives. Sorry about the sound, guys, but I've got to have the window open or it gets too stuffy in here. But hopefully ZT will be implementing that hidden flipper tab or that spring-loaded tab on a couple of other models moving forward. That would be really cool to see. It'll be really cool to see where they go with this. It is a bearing flipper, and the detent is really nice. And I don't know why that guy is vacuuming right now. It's like 7:30 in the morning, but of course he's got to do it right now. Anyway. So next thing to talk about is the detent, and the detent on this is really well done. I would say even a little more balanced than most ZTs. They have, you know, there are some ZTs where if you even touch the lock bar, the knife won't deploy for you. That is not the case with this guy. It's firm enough that, you know, if I can put some pressure on this, I'm pushing now and the knife's not deploying, I keep pushing and boom, the detent breaks and the knife flips open really nicely. By the way, it sounds weird because whenever I flip it, you can hear the tab kind of pop back into place. So in terms of, by the way, bearing pivot, there you go. And so very, very smooth, nicely done on the action here. So yeah, detent is good. Spring-loaded tab works really well, and the bearing pivot is really good. And by the way, at this point, I think we expect most of those things from Zero Tolerance. I can't really come up with a ZT that I can think of that doesn't have a pretty decent action on it, except for maybe some of the 0200, for example, wasn't amazing, but you could still get it to flip with a little wrist action. Anyway, all of that stuff is very, very well done, and so I really don't have any complaints in terms of lockup and deployment. I should point out too, the lock bar on this is really nicely done. they've got this nice little cutout here that allows you to access this lock bar. It does have the stainless steel lock bar insert, and it does have this little cutout. I don't know the whole purpose of this. Like, did they? Anyway, I guess it's just to get the lock bar past the flipper tab. It would have been kind of cool if they just milled out a section for that instead of just cut it out totally, right? So this would match the other side a little bit better. But this way is fine too, and I guess if you're trying to showcase this tab, maybe you'd want to leave that missing. Not a big complaint, but visually, you know, I understand why they did it, right? They had to cut out so the knife would lock up, right? But I would have liked to see this kind of milled out and recessed to allow for that tab rather than just cut out completely. Okay, moving on with life. We've talked about the action now, and I really think all of it is really good, especially like the way they've implemented the spring-loaded tab. If you want to see that taken apart, Epic Snuggle Bunny has a really good video of that, so I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here and do that aspect, but go over and check it out on his channel. Finally, we want to talk about the handle and the ergonomics. So let's talk about the handle from a construction standpoint first. And in that sense, it is extremely well done. Look at the milling here, the beautiful patterns. It's 3D. It's like there is so much interesting detail here that I've got to say, very, very well done, ZT. This is a really, really nice looking, very, very impressive handle. Even the way this angle works to kind of meet your hand, you know, all of that is really, really good. Floating aluminum backspacer. Now, floating backspacer is awesome. The bright blue, either way, I wish it was titanium, okay, and likely there will be aftermarket backspacers available here, so a really nice aftermarket backspacer I think would add a lot to this knife. But it works just fine, so I'm not going to complain too much about it. I know that if they'd done titanium, the knife likely would have cost a little more. The other thing I'll remind you of again is as you look there, you can see those milled out pockets, and so the knife is milled internally, which again, really, really nice touch. So in terms of construction, how this is built, how it's made, really impressive, okay? I've got to say, total props to ZT on making this handle really, really well. Now, in terms of oh, and I guess it's just a spring clip, which a number of people have pointed out, and every time ZT does a spring clip, they're going to get some heat about it because people think of them as a high-end brand. They don't think of spring clips as high-end, okay? So the reality is it functions really, really well, and if you want something more high-end, there are a few guys on Instagram, at Purvis Blades, I think, is one of the best ones that I've seen, doing some really nice aftermarket clips, 3D machined clips from Timascus for this knife. They look really sharp. By the way, that clip can be moved to the other side. One last note on construction, there's the lanyard hole there, and it's a pretty standard lanyard hole. Honestly, I'm not sure how I feel about it. I feel like they could have pretty easily integrated it into the backspacer here rather than drilled a hole in the knife. All right, so that would have been a welcomed change as far as I'm concerned. Now, construction-wise, great. Look at all that cool stuff. Look at the cool milling. I think it's extremely well done. Where I have a bit of a problem is with ergonomics. This is not the most comfortable handle. It's not terrible, and I'm not like, oh, it's hurting me every time I grab it. No, it's just, you know, compared to almost any knife, I've got a few comparisons here, and literally any knife that I have here for comparison is more comfortable than this. All right, so ergonomically, it's not amazing. The other issue I have with it ergonomically is it's a little slick in a couple of places. Number one, here at the front where we're kind of used to having some kind of choil in this area to keep us from sliding up on the blade, there's nothing. And for me, the way this knife is built, right, look at how I've got, you know, a nice flat spine and even more flat spine up here. Well, I'm often wanting to get right up here choked up and use the knife like this, which is fine and it works really well like that, except there is that risk. Look how close I am to the blade. It would have been nice to see some, even if it was just some jimping here to stop me from possibly sliding up on that blade, it would have been very appreciated. The other place jimping would have been appreciated is on the back spine. It really is slick back here. Otherwise, now the handle itself is not super, super slippery. One of the ways I measure that is if I'm trying to deploy the knife, do I have a hard time gripping it to do that? And I really don't. So I can't say too much negative about that aspect, but just it's not very comfortable, and there are a couple places where I feel like I could slip up on the knife. So those things are a bit of an issue for me. Let's go ahead and get to some comparisons. I gave a lot of thought to how I do these comparisons. And I think I'm just going to try to give you some size and then some similar knives. So here's the Paramilitary 2, and primarily that's there to give you a good sense for how big this knife is. And it's a pretty big knife, and it's got an awful lot of cutting edge. Let's grab a Rat 1 as well. There you go. And our friend wants to turn his vacuum back on, which is wonderful. So there's the Rat 1. Again, people are very familiar with the size of this knife, and so that should give you, again, a pretty good sense of the size of the ZT here. It's a fairly large knife. Oh yeah, one more budget offering. Now this was a knife I recently reviewed, and it kind of reminded me of the look. Okay, it's sort of a modern, very clean line type of look, and so I just wanted to quickly show you. Of course, the other thing about this, maybe you're watching this and going, yeah, Kevin, you have a lot of expensive knives and that's not really in my price range. Something like this looks very similar and serves even a similar role and is actually considerably more comfortable. But this is the new Rake P135 and would be sort of a, if you really like a modern, clean design, this would be a very budget-friendly option for you. Okay, so what have I got for titanium frame locks? I've got, first, a knife that I've compared this to a couple of times. This is the WE 604, and the reason I compare these two knives is because from a design standpoint, they're amazing. From a user standpoint, they're okay, all right? I'm not gonna call, neither one of these is bad, okay? Both of them will do the cutting tasks that I need them to do, and I have EDC'd both of these quite a bit, and it's not that I'm like, oh man, I need to cut something and this is all I've got, right? It cuts just fine. It just doesn't cut as well as, say, something like this, right? Which is another comparison I've got for you. Or even something like this, all right? So, WE knives, very close in price for a lot of the WE models. I think they're going for around $250 right now, and this is $220. So, pretty interesting comparison here, and I'm sure we could have a whole long discussion about that, but I won't go too far other than to say, yeah, there are a bunch of WE knives that are, similarly priced titanium frame locks with some other interesting, design elements. Here is a knife that I often bring in for comparison. This is the Real Steel Megalodon. Very well made titanium frame lock, M390 steel. Just a great knife, super, super comfortable in hand, very utilitarian. And if you, sort of have this idea that, man, I'd love to get my first titanium frame lock, this is a great option because you're getting a level of quality that is above and beyond what you would ever imagine for, I think about $200 that this goes for, and I think you can even find them cheaper if you really shop around. I've heard people getting them for as low as $150. Let's pull in one other knife here. Here is the Riat Knives Epoch. Great knife, again, more comfortable. Now, Riat knives, there's a level of engineering here. This is definitely a step up in terms of quality, and you can really feel it when you deploy the knife, but of course, you're paying quite a bit extra for that. So those are a few comparisons, and I know there are many more that we could offer. Now, the one thing I would say about this is if I had a bunch of other ZTs here, it would be a bit of an unfair comparison because most, if I had, let's say, the 0562 or the 0560, if I had the, even the 0920, a whole bunch of different ZTs that are out there are going to be better utility cutting tools than this guy. And they're going to have better ergonomics and be more capable. Even, I would not call this a defensive blade. It just doesn't have the kind of traction that I'd like to see on it. And so that is one limitation that this knife has, okay? So now that we've gone through the comparisons, what is my overall take on this knife? This is a well-built knife. It's an amazing design from an amazing designer that is extremely highly sought after and extremely hard to get. And so if you've always dreamed of having a GTC knife, you've always wanted to check out something that he's designed, this could be as close as many people will get, and it's awesome that ZT has done this collaboration. And for those reasons, I love this knife, right? It's well built, the design is extremely compelling. The downside, I guess, the balance side is it's not super comfortable in hand and it's not the most utilitarian blade shape out there, okay? And so for that reason, here's where I would place this blade. If you're a collector and you've got some other knives, and so all of your knives are more occasional carry than everyday carry, I think this is a great option and you would definitely do well to pick it up. If you're watching this thinking, is this is like the only ZT I'm gonna buy, I would probably steer you in a different direction. This is a great knife and the quality is on par, but there are other zero tolerances that are going to be more well suited to just a vast array of cutting tasks, where this one is a little bit limited in that aspect. So that's how I would call this knife. A great, amazing design, perfect for occasional carry, but I think for an EDC knife, there are some other options that are probably a little bit better. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.